Have you ever been watching a film and thought, that building doesn't belong in that city? It's probably because it wasn't filmed there. I'm Liz Jahn, and today we're looking at memorable film locations that aren't where they claim to be. The Hotel from 1959's Some Like It Hot. The scene is set in Florida, but is actually filmed in San Diego, California. This style of hotel would not have existed in Florida in the 1920s. This is a hotel in Miami that would have been more typical of that time period. You would have found more Spanish or an Italianate influence, made of stucco using indigenous coral rock. It's very rectilinear in terms of the architecture. There were no hotels in Florida that resembled the wood clapboard structure, the Queen Anne style, open porches, turrets did not exist in Florida. The wood structures would have been blown away a long time ago by the hurricanes. It's a great place to film a movie in terms of the scenes and the architecture, but it would have been very different filming that in Florida because it doesn't exist in Florida. The resort from 1987's Dirty Dancing.
That was the summer we went to Kellerman's.
The film is set in upstate New York in the Catskill Mountains, but it was actually filmed in Virginia. The resort is actually based on a real resort, the no longer in operation, in the Catskills called Grossinger's. Stylistically, Grossinger's is a big, rambling complex. It started off with smaller Tudor-style buildings, and if you contrast that to the stone lodge shown in the actual film of Dirty Dancing, they're very different. You could make the leap that it's a local stone, they've used it for the whole building. You don't find any of the buildings in the Catskills using local quarried stone. It's sort of nestled in the landscape as opposed to sitting on the landscape with expansive views like the hotel has in Dirty Dancing. The house from 1988's Beetlejuice.
I was just telling Barbara about this offer on the house.
No, Jane.
So this movie is set in Connecticut, but is actually filmed in East Corinth, Vermont. So what strikes me immediately about this building is the scale is way off and very exaggerated. So here's a picture of a house found in Connecticut that would be more traditional in terms of its scale, in terms of how it sits in the landscape. It's a pretty simple structure. You have two gables. The way they intersect is very clear. And it kind of combines elements of the barn with the brick red. It has clapboard, has metal roofs, and then traditional vernacular architecture. In contrast, the house in Beetlejuice, you have this tall tower that has a mansard roof, more of an Addams Family feature. The composition is very kind of awkward and exaggerated. The house from 2009's The Proposal.
Have the two of you told your parents about your secret love?
We're going to their place this weekend.
Oh, where's that? Alaska.
Alaska.
It's set in Alaska, but actually filmed in Massachusetts. So in Alaska, typically you would find a more rugged architecture. There's not as much detail as you find on this house. The eaves, the dormers, the shutters, and all of that is very hard to maintain in very harsh conditions. Here's an example of a traditional Alaskan house. The exterior of the house is made with hand-hewn logs, unpainted, natural. The house in The Proposal is shingle and clapboard siding that is painted. There would be no gutters because the snow load would just bend them. It has a metal roof, which is typical a lot in colder climates. To save heat, a lot of the houses, the openings are punched, like you see here. Discrete openings with a lot of walls in between, except for sort of this upper expanse. So if this house that they're showing us was in Alaska, it would be a fortune to heat, a fortune to maintain, and would not be practical. The Overlook Hotel from The Shining, 1980.
This is our Colorado lounge.
Oh, it's beautiful. As a matter of fact, this is probably the most gorgeous hotel I've ever seen.
Stephen King got his inspiration for the book The Shining while staying at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, but the movie was actually filmed at the Timberline Hotel in Oregon. So the Overlook Hotel in Oregon is a hotel near a ski lodge, used a lot by skiers. It has long, large sloping roofs with small windows. It has stone base and natural wood siding. and it looks a little creepy from the outside. So this is the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Definitely there's different looks for the hotels. This is a very Georgian hotel, horizontal siding, painted with the cupola on top and the dormers, hipped roofs, 3 stories. Doesn't have any foreboding presence at all. When you look at the interiors of The Shining, it's interesting to compare and contrast the exterior with the interior. Because when you really look at the exterior and the long sloping roofs and the dormers, you expect to find a very different interior. Stanley Kubrick was said to have liked that incongruity between the spaces and that it gave him more of a feeling of menace to the movie, and that contributed to the whole overall feel. The Mansion from Scarface, 1983. This supposedly is Coral Gables, Florida, but it's actually Montecito, California. At first glance, it would seem like it could fit into the Florida landscape. It's a neoclassical stuccoed mansion. But if you look at building types from the same time period that were built, for example, buildings in Miami would have incorporated more of the natural resources in Miami, like coral rock, stucco. They would have had more Italian influences. It has the tower building. It has the upper story loggia to look out. This is a typical Renaissance style you find on a lot of palazzos, like in Florence. One of the most obvious differences here for me is the fact that the landscape is very different. The drop in elevation that you see in the movie where they're walking towards the tiger with the bridge, you would not find in the landscape in Miami. It would never have that much elevation change. This is more neoclassical, the use of the ionic columns. There's no embellishment on the windows. It's more blocky, more symmetrical. The House from 2017's Get Out.
So you guys coming up from the city?
Yeah, we're just heading up for the weekend.
Can I see your license, please?
He wasn't driving.
Call me Dean and hug me, my man.
The movie is set in upstate New York, but it's filmed in Fairhope, Alabama. One of the big giveaways is the fact that it's the brick structure. It's a 1-story. It has these flanking pavilions on either side. And it has these columns with the long open porch. The tall windows that open out to it are also something that you would find more in southern houses. If you had a brick building in the north, there would probably be 2 stories. The windows would be punched, probably double hung. The front porch might be a smaller portico that's added on just to give you shelter from rain or snow. And it wouldn't have the architectural details that this house does. The House from 2005's Amityville Horror. The house is supposed to be set in Amityville, New York, and Long Island, but it was filmed in Salem, Wisconsin. The existing house in Amityville, Long Island is very square, center door, very symmetrical, has a gambrel roof. It's a shingle house, and then it has these 2 symmetrical porches on either end, which are probably sun porches. One of them could have been open at one time and closed in. In the house that's filmed in Wisconsin, you can see the very steep gables, you can see the turret, you can see the big long porch in the back of the house. So it's very different in composition and style to the existing house in Amityville. They're just totally 2 opposing styles of architecture. And I think probably they used the Amityville one because it does have this anthropomorphic parts of it that give it a sense of horror. Ferris Bueller's House from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 1986. This film is set outside of Chicago, Illinois, but was actually filmed in Long Beach, California. Unlike other houses that we've talked about filmed in different locations, they did a great job finding this house in California to represent Chicago, Illinois. A lot of the characteristics of a house probably found in the Midwest would be the double-hung windows, the clapboard, the columned portico. Very simple structure, but it has sort of stately characteristics that you find outside of Chicago. They have a very similar feel, so good job to the filmmakers. The Cityscape from 2005's The Island. So this claims to be set in the year 2019 in LA, but it's actually filmed in Detroit. Here's Detroit, here's LA. At first glance, you could see why they chose to film the movie in Detroit, because it shares a lot of similarities with the skyline in LA. But if you look more closely, you can see a lot of the buildings in Detroit were made of traditional materials. In the LA, you can see the wide freeway, which would be a dead giveaway for that, and sort of the more tall, modern objects in the landscape. As a side note, when you look at this shot in the movie, there's a billboard that says the name Jahn, which happens to be my last name. So I had to look it up, and it was a furniture store in Detroit, a dead giveaway for where the movie was filmed. Tara House from Gone with the Wind, 1939.
Miss Scarlett, where are you going without your shawl and night air fixing to set in?
The film is set in Georgia, but it's actually filmed on a back lot in a studio in California. The thing that stands out the most to me is the fact that the columns are brick and painted brick, which you typically would not find on a southern plantation house. As an example, for just the column reference, they would either be round, Ionic, Doric, or some sort of classical column, or else they would be square and panelized. And this picture just really represents the columns. The mansion from 2004's Mean Girls. The movie was set in Evanston, Illinois, but actually filmed in Toronto, Canada. So the house from Mean Girls emphasizes the importance of the owner who lives there. It sort of towers over the landscape. The double height portico, the double height columns, probably helps to exaggerate the characters. This house is found on the North Shore. The house is well proportioned and well scaled in terms of the lot size. There's a lot of vegetation. There's stone, but there's also stucco. They have elements such as the bay windows and the eyebrow window. It's a much more discreet expression of somebody's wealth. Even though these locations are not 100% accurate, the filmmakers have made conscious decisions to support their vision. It might not be right, but it's not wrong.